I rage quit the Great Ace Attorney again for what I think is like, I don't know, the third or fourth time. I hate these games, but this time I'm at like the final stretch of like the final case, and I even looked up how it ended because I was just so fed up with this game and its nonsense. This is, I think, the worst Ace Attorney game there is. Like, even when you take into consideration that like the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles is like 10 cases long, it's bad. Okay. The cases don't tie together very well. The characters aren't interesting. The cases aren't fun. Like, they don't do anything to really build up to like a satisfying overarching narrative. Like, it's so frustrating seeing them put so much effort into like, I don't know, into creating this weird alternate history, doing all this stuff to kind of make it feel like, with great music, great character models, gorgeous locales, a lot of effort put into like making this kind of a next generation Ace Attorney. Like, all this effort wasted on something that essentially amounts to one of the most inane racism bad plots I've ever seen in my life. It's remarkable, how 10 years ago I was really looking forward to this game, how I expected it to be way better than Ace Attorney 6, how I really felt that this was like going to be this huge exciting thing just completely wasted. Like, it's just so frustrating how this game, which really should have been a slam dunk, just completely and utterly fails. It fails as an Ace Attorney game. It fails as like a Sherlock Holmes thing. It fails at like just being a video game in general. And like, there are a handful of things about this that I do find kind of interesting. The jury and like, some of the characters I like, but like by and large, it was like an insanely frustrating experience that I was just fed up with, like, before I even got close to finishing it. I think it was about like halfway through like the third case in the first game where I'm just kind of like, this is this is bad. Like, it's just straight up terrible. Like, what they do here. And considering how like case two of the original Greatest Attorney is like one where there is no trial, like, you can see how this thing just completely drops the ball. Like, it for a game that's supposed to be about Sherlock Holmes, he has very little, shockingly little presence in this. Right? He doesn't do anything aside from pretend to be retarded. None of the existing Holmes lore really ties into all this very well. It's all like a bastardization of it. It's like, it's so frustrating if you're like an actual Holmes fan playing this, because like they do these really ridiculous things where they just kind of like, oh yeah, all these old cases happened, but Lestrade doesn't exist apparently, and now like Lestrade, like he's a teenage girl, and ooh, she's a thief from the East End, and it's like if you're familiar with like the setup at all, you really do start to have a contempt for like how they utilize pre-existing characters for the most part. I actually really liked what they did with Enoch Trevor. Like, for the most part, he's like one of my favorite witnesses in Ace Attorney ever. But like, for the most part, most of like the callbacks to like pre-existing Holmes lore and like the usage of characters is just kind of weird. Like, I would argue that like Lestrade is like an essential character when it comes to the Holmes mythos. Being kind of like representation of like typical like detective work, and like Holmes is just so far above Lestrade. It's kind of essential. That character is kind of essential to the format, right? Like, and with this, not having characters like that, bastardizing characters like Watson, and like uh hyper focusing on like a bunch of characters that like nobody cares about. Like, what ends up happening is that you get this really convoluted, bloated mess. And that's like the weird thing looking at this, is that they're like, you can see what they were going for with this idea of like these Japanese people traveling to like a foreign land, and like getting to know the culture and the people there and stuff like that. You can understand what they were trying to do, but at the end of the day, what they kind of came up with was just so offensive and disrespectful to like the history of like Holmes, that it really needs to be seen to be believed. And it's really something that if I had the skill or the time, that I would love to do like a full on like video, like, fully fledged, like hour long, like analysis video on. But I think like condensed into the simplest possible way, this doesn't really respect the Holmes legacy. And like I keep saying, people dispute that, like, oh no, Holmes really was this kind of guy in the original stories. And I'm just like, like, okay, first of all, I'm more familiar with Holmes than you are, first of all. And second of all, like, they don't nail Holmes at all. Like, that's not true. People do this thing where he's like, oh, he's kind of goofy. He kind of does weird shit sometimes. And it's like, yeah, not like this. He doesn't pretend to be retarded, you know? Like, he doesn't do this thing. Like, it's it's ridiculous to me, like, the lengths this game goes to try and like present this as like a Sherlock Holmes thing, when like you have no real tie-ins to like existing stories. You have like radically changed characters that have nothing to do with like the pre-existing canon, which somehow still simultaneously exists. You have this weird bait and switch where Watson is set up right from the beginning as being the first victim of the case, and there was this implication that like, oh, he was doing something in Japan, and it all ties into this great conspiracy. Wasted. I don't want to get into spoiler territory. Well, okay, maybe I should. It's like this game's old as dirt. So yeah, like, Watson is not Watson in this. Like, Watson is some other guy. And it's like, it's such a weird bait and switch that like it honestly doesn't make any sense at all. Like give Watson his dues. Like, again, this is what I mean when I say that like they don't understand the Holmes character, where like they just do this dumb thing where like they disrespect an integral part of like why the character works, which is, the foil of Watson. Without Watson, Holmes isn't like uh, as compelling as a character. Like, Watson is essential to making the Holmes character work, and they made the decision to just write him out so they could do this weird bait and switch instead with like some other guy. Like, no, absolutely not. Watson, out of all the characters in the Holmes mythos, is the one that should have been present there. Like, absolutely should have had some bearing on the plot, and yet, like, they don't do it at all. They could have done anything with like, like, if like your Holmes history, like, the implication initially was that like Iris was Watson's daughter. Okay, if you know anything about that, that like makes sense, because like, he marries Mary Morstan at the end of A Study in Scarlet. Iris could have been born around that time. And then like they got into some issue, maybe involving the treasure, that resulted in, Watson having to leave the country, or like something happening to the mother. Like, this is all very straightforward stuff. Like, just have a natural evolution to stuff that we know happened. There are people who will tell you that like, who believe that like Mary died after a certain point, and that like Watson remarried. Like, there's all these like things you could have done with the concept to make it interesting, to make it feel fresh while still tying it into like pre-existing continuity. But no, instead they do this really, really nonsensical like bullshit where they just go to great lengths to just like not utilize any of that. They throw token references at like Holmes lore, and it, none of it is like very well applied at all. The Redheaded League is in this. Wasted. They're not interesting or fun. The scam isn't even like the same as it was in the story. And then you have like the man with the twisted lip. If you know the story, you'll see that twist coming a mile away. It's like you, and like they're so few and far between as well. Like, so much of this game is just the Japanese characters going around like talking about how they're Japanese, like interacting with these people who honestly should be shocked at the idea that like Japanese people are like practicing in the courtroom. Like, it's so shocking like how that doesn't come off more often. Like like this is even a thing in the last case where like it's two Japanese guys, the defense and the prosecution, like going up against each other in a British court, like in like this closed court that's not open to the public. This giant conspiracy that needs to be buried for the sake of like national security. It's just like, yeah, let's just have some Japanese guys do it. Like, what? Huh? Like, so much of this game is just like, it's so contrived and just doesn't come together at all. And like, it's so frustrating in like the occasional moment where it does kind of work. Like Enoch Drebber is an interesting example because that is not a character that people really think of when it comes to like classic iconic like Holmes characters. I think, and I think the reinvention of that guy actually was really interesting and like could have been interesting, or I liked it way more than like the original. Actually, I'm very notoriously critical of like A Study in Scarlet. Actually, um, like Sherlock Holmes is not in it that much, but anyway, I I was I felt that the character per, as presented in like The Greatest Attorney was awesome. I love his design. I love like his notoriety. I love like the links he goes to hide his nonsense. Great witness. I was very, very, very taken aback by how well they were able to like they were able to do so much with like this character. Enoch Drebber. Like I didn't like they somehow managed to make this character sound ominous in a way, and like I was kind of shocked when I realized that like, wait a minute, this is actually a a pre-existing Holmes character. So like it was it was very, very interesting, like having situations like that where you see things that could have worked. Like I complained a lot about Lestrade early on, specifically. Like, when I first met Gina, my thought was that like she was his daughter, and that would like made a lot more sense to me considering the timeline and like everything that's happened. Like I'm just like, oh yeah, yeah, something happened to Lestrade, and Gina's his daughter, and you know, that's why like, but like that's why Holmes knows her or whatever. Like that was kind of my mindset. And then like it's revealed later on, like, no, yeah, this is Lestrade. Like we turned him into like a teenage girl. Like, and I'm just like, why? Like it would have been so easy to just give Lestrade a daughter. Like, having the character there, having Gregson. Like I'm always confused about why is Gregson the primary detective in this, like from the police, like because Lestrade is like way more well known and notorious because of how often he butts heads with Holmes. It's like the Great Ace Attorney Lestrade has nothing to do with like the original version. Like it's like it's like why do this? Like why do and like the worst thing is I actually like Gina Lestrade as a character. Like my issue with this is how she's implemented in the story and how that like ties into like everything we know about the setting and like it's just silly. Like the changes they made and the things they did and the stunts they pulled and like the characters that they decided to pull from, and just like the goofy, like I don't know, like to me it feels like the creators paid way too much attention to like hack like literary critics when writing this, because there's this bit in like The Greatest Attorney 2, The Greatest Attorney, okay, it was case 2 of the first game, excuse me. There's a bit in that where they take a lot of time to shit on like the concept of like the adventure of the speckled band, because like some people think it's like unrealistic and nothing about it makes any sense. Like it's the sort of thing you would never pick up on unless you like hyper analyze the text, and like that's not something that like anybody actually does, right? Like for me, I really, really enjoy the speckled band. I really enjoy the setup and like the resolution and like the idea of it. So like the idea that people would like mock it for being unrealistic when like the entire premise of Sherlock Holmes is kind of ridiculous. Um, like I have like a big issue with that from a conceptual standpoint. Like it's like they don't respect like the history of the character and what this like story brought to the table. Like I just felt like it was super unnecessary. And like instead of just like incorporating, that story and its character, its idea into like the game. It's like, oh yeah, Holmes is gonna do this thing where he always talks about snakes, and it's his favorite case for some reason. And isn't that goofy? Because that case was ridiculous. It's like, come on, it just doesn't work. Like it just doesn't work. Like it's really odd. Like, well, I mean, okay, one of the nice things I will say about this, it doesn't fall into the trap that a lot of other Holmes media like falls into, where we don't see like, ooh, who's the bad guy? Professor Moriarty, like, doesn't appear in this, like, kind of shockingly. I was very, very surprised about that. Who's Holmes' love interest? Like Irene Adler, does not appear in this either. Although she is mentioned, apparently Susato is aware she exists. So it's like there are things like that are like kind of interesting that like, I'm sick to death of seeing in Holmes media, and I think that's kind of the problem that this has is that like Holmes stuff in like a lot of ways has been done to death, and this was trying to like reinvent it and trying to do something radically different. And like I just think like this is so different from what we typically see that like it doesn't work. Like it just doesn't feel as if like this is something that was really well thought out or produced very well. It's just like they really wanted to do this thing where like the characters go to London and go on adventures with Sherlock Holmes, and I'm just like, why? Like the characters should have been, I think, like fairly segregated, fairly separate. Like Holmes should have just been a detective you run into sometimes. I feel like the idea that like he's been manipulating everything behind the scenes, and that he's like that you live with him and that you interact with him all the time. It just kind of like it just feels really, really forced. And it just feels like it doesn't really gel together very well with Ace Attorney as a whole. Like it just feels like it doesn't work, honestly. Anyway, I'm kind of reminded of how I felt with like Professor Layton, where like that game was like initially promoted as this idea that like, oh yeah, Layton would be the prosecutor, uh Phoenix would be defending the girl, and like it doesn't actually happen that way like at all. Like I think Layton's like does this thing where he's just like figures out the entire plot like just because he's Layton and he knows everything. It's like this isn't nearly as like frustrating as that, but like the plot also isn't like as interesting. It's like it's so ridiculous how this game like wants to feel like it has this overarching narrative, like about the science symposium and about like the professor and about what happened 10 years ago, and yet like they do a very poor job like tying it all together and like building up to it. Like basically like I think the only hint you get towards this in the original is that like the fact that like Barrack von Zykes is like super racist against the Japanese, like and it's like every single twist in this game, it just feels like it comes out of nowhere. You get like reveals like who the antagonists are, and like this guy is a culprit, and this guy dies, and this guy was doing something, and like this guy is this guy, like this chick's father, and like you get like all these revelations, and yet like they don't feel natural. They don't feel like they've been built up to over time. And like playing like I started playing Apollo Justice immediately after finishing this, and it kind of dawned on me just how better thought out the actual structure was, where like you go into the courtroom, you're presented with the trial, and you have to figure out like all these like logic puzzles in regards to like the narrative versus like reality. Like and there were so many times when I was playing this where the Great Ace Attorney, where like it feels like nothing happens, and you're just kind of like hearing exposition, a lot. And occasionally you would be like asked to like present evidence against some vague statement to prove something, and it's just like Traditionally, I've been very critical of the idea that like Ace Attorney should be considered visual novels because I felt like they did have quite a lot of gameplay to them, where you have quite a lot of like thinking you have to do and logic puzzles. Like it doesn't like railroad itself. Like with the Great Ace Attorney, like I honestly feel like this feels like it's structured like a visual novel, where it's not really about the courtroom antics, like it's about like the characters and about the setting and about like the world. And it's just like I feel like that design doesn't suit with Ace Attorney, like doesn't suit Ace Attorney at all. Because there are so many times where like you're doing something and then you get like sidetracked into something else and it feels completely unrelated and it feels like really forced and unnatural. And then it's revealed that the thing is like has something to do with the trial you're working on then. But it's like it's not organic. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel very well implemented. It feels forced, in other words. Like an Ace Attorney, like in the original trilogy, like you go to new locations when you find out about it, like through organic ways, like through evidence or through like things of that nature. Like in the Greatest Attorney, like, oh yeah, we have to go to this location because Holmes is there, and then like he's there, and then like it turns out that that location is like super critical to like what happened to this seemingly completely unrelated like other trial. It's like it's forced, it doesn't work at all, and like that's kind of my mindset. Like playing this and like thinking about it and just like trying to slog through this is that like it's just not that fun of an experience. Like it doesn't do anything like fun, interesting, original. It doesn't do anything to draw you in. It doesn't make you think. It's like the cross examinations are whack because none of them ever make any sense. A lot of the witnesses are very very boring. Like so many of them are just like, oh yeah, I'm a street seller. Like I sell firecrackers. It's like they don't really do a whole lot to sell you on this idea that like these characters matter. And there's a bunch of them in this game. And there are so many times where like a character comes back, like I don't know, like 3, 5, 10 cases later and is inexplicably like super relevant. Like this is a game where a character from the first case of the first game reappears in case 4 of the second and is now the culprit. Like no build up. You don't talk to him, like you don't interact with him. Like most people wouldn't even assume he was like a serious character, but yeah, he's a twist villain and not a very good one. And it's very frustrating because like his actual cross examination sequence is pretty good and like memorable because he knows the law and he knows how to like circumvent things. But it's like you get to this twist villain which could have been under better direction, like a ten out of 10 like twist villain, right? If it was better built up, but it just doesn't work. A major character dies in this game, like someone who's been around since forever. Like I feel nothing. You get resolution for like Kazuma dying in this. Nothing happens. Susato comes back after leaving after the first game, and nothing really amounts to that. Like her dad wasn't even sick. Like it's like, huh? What? It's like there are so many instances like that where like they set something up and do something, and they just kind of like throw in a twist for the sake of having a twist, and it just kind of like ruins like what they had going to begin with. For example, a really good example of this, Iris's parentage, right? So you go through this like really dumb like ordeal where for like the first game and like a lot of the second, you believe her dad is Watson, right? And then you get this shocking swerve that like, ooh, like someone else did this, ooh, and then like you suspect that her father is someone else, but that someone else, when you figure this out, comes by the office and then is very quick to be like, oh yeah, I'm not her dad, and it's like, wait, what? And like so like the reveal of her actual parent is so unbelievably dumb that you just can't take it seriously. Like, honestly, I would have preferred if her dad was just Watson. Okay. Like, that made way more sense. Like, considering the setup and like the setting, like, again, like a twist for the sake of having a twist. Like, it's so stupid that like you just can't wrap your head around the fact that like anybody, especially Iris herself, could ever have believed it. It's like they were just throwing everything they had at the wall to stick. Iris is like the worst character in Ace Attorney ever, by the way. Like she contributes absolutely nothing to the plot. Okay, if Iris was cut out entirely, you would lose absolutely nothing out of the story. But like, yeah, like it's just I was just like, I was aghast at just how bad this was. Like, I was just infuriated, like, at just how this is, like, how poorly handled this was, especially the second game. I can't stand it. Like, honestly, like, I really don't think I'll ever go back and revisit this one. Like, I've been listening to like, the complete Sherlock Holmes on Audible, and now I have a renewed passion for the Great Detective, which this game came very close to killing. So I'm definitely very excited to like, be reading Sherlock Holmes again or listening to it rather. Like I'm very excited about like, re-experiencing these classic stories and I have a more of an appreciation for them. So I guess that's the good like side thing to the Greatest Attorney, right? That this game was so bad it made me love Sherlock Holmes all the more.